20 months after my father sent me a box of handmade chocolates for Christmas. He stood in a Connecticut courtroom and blamed me for the prison sentence he had built with his own hands. By then, the Bell and Daughters sign had been taken down. The glass cases were gone, the front windows were papered over, and the man who had spent his life polishing our family name was wearing a county-issued shirt beneath his suit jacket. But on the morning of December 26th, none of that had happened yet. My father called at 8:12. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, waiting for coffee to finish dripping, while freezing rain ticked against the windows. "How were the chocolates?" Gerald asked. Not "Merry Christmas." Not "Did you get home safely?" He wanted to know about the chocolates. "I gave them to Alyssa," I said. "She loves sweets." The line went still. I could hear a television murmuring somewhere behind him, then the sharp scrape of a chair across hardwood. "You did what?" my father shouted. The coffee machine clicked off. I set my mug down without pouring. "What was in the box?" I asked. "Before I tell you what my sister found beneath that tray, I hope you're doing well today. Stay with me, and if family secrets, hard choices, and earned justice are the stories you enjoy, please subscribe to the channel and keep listening." My father recovered quickly. He always did. Panic left his voice so cleanly that another person might have wondered whether it had been there at all. "It was a gift for you," Gerald said. "I'm allowed to be surprised when my own daughter gives away something I chose for her. You haven't chosen a Christmas gift for me in 5 years. That's exactly why it mattered." The answer came too smoothly. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer beside the refrigerator and wrote the time at the top. The time was 8:12. Dad asked about chocolates and shouted when told Alyssa had them. "What brand were they?" I asked. "For crying out loud, Samantha, they were chocolates." "Did you make them?" "What kind of question is that?" "The kind you can answer." His breathing changed. Not much, just a faint drag at the end of each inhale. I had heard it across work tables at the jewelry store, whenever an appraisal came back lower than he wanted. "Call your sister," Gerald said. "Tell her not to open anything else. I'll pick up the box." "What am I telling her is wrong with it?" "Nothing is wrong with it. You always do this. You take one awkward moment and turn it into an investigation." I pictured the blue gift box, the silver ribbon Alyssa had pulled loose at dinner, and the small white card tucked beneath the bow. It had read, "For Samantha, with Christmas wishes from Dad." "Why can't she open it?" I asked. My father ended the call. The silence afterward lasted less than a second before I called Alyssa. Her phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again and got the same result. A text arrived while I was dialing a third time. "I'm coming over, don't call Dad." That was not how my younger sister usually handled trouble. Alyssa called our father for everything, from a dead car battery to a bad review on the store's social media page. Gerald enjoyed being needed, and Alyssa had spent most of her life making sure he was. I locked the front door, then unlocked it again so she would not have to stand in the sleet. After that, I opened the note app on my phone and typed out the exchange with my father while every word was fresh. At 8:34, tires hissed against the wet street. Alyssa came through my door without knocking, carrying the chocolate box with both hands. Her cream coat hung open. Melted sleet darkened her hair near the temples, and the thin leather flats she wore were soaked through. She placed the box on my dining table so carefully that the legs gave a tiny wooden creak. "What did you do?" Alyssa asked. "I gave you a Christmas present." "I'm serious, Sam." "So am I." Alyssa pushed the loosened lid toward me. Most of the chocolates were still arranged in neat brown paper cups, though the molded tray had been lifted out and set crookedly on top. Beneath it, the bottom lining had peeled back at one corner. The box did not look empty under the tray. It looked built. 4 shallow rectangular spaces had been cut into a second layer of cardboard. 3 held black velvet pouches, each no larger than my palm. The 4th space was bare. The air in my dining room smelled of wet wool, coffee, and dark chocolate. Underneath those ordinary smells sat the faint chemical bite of fresh adhesive. "Did you take anything out?" I asked. Alyssa answered before I had finished the question. "I didn't remove anything." Her gaze dropped to the box, then moved toward the front window. "I did not accuse her, at least not yet. Tell me exactly how you found this." "The box was rocking on my counter," Alyssa said. "One corner wouldn't sit flat. I thought maybe one of the chocolates had fallen underneath, so I lifted the tray." Then I saw the bags. Did you open them? I opened one pouch. What was inside? Alyssa swallowed. There was a diamond. The word changed the room. My fingers went cold, but my thoughts became very clear. Put your hands in your coat pockets, I said. Why should I do that? Because neither of us is touching the box again. She stared at me for a moment, then shoved both hands into her pockets. I stepped back, took several wide photographs without moving the box, and included the table, the tray, the empty fourth space, and all 3 velvet pouches. Then I called Naomi Price. Naomi had represented me during a contract dispute the year before. She was not a friend, which was one reason I trusted her. Friendship sometimes made people soften facts. Naomi sharpened them. Tell me what you touched, Naomi said after I explained. The lid yesterday, but nothing today. What did your sister touch? The tray, the lining, and 1 pouch. Stop there, Naomi said. Do not examine the stones. Do not remove anything. Take no more close photographs. Call the police and tell them you may have received property connected to your father's business. I'm leaving now. Alyssa's shoulders tightened. Connected to the store? You don't know that. The pouches are the same kind Bell and Daughters uses for loose stones. That doesn't mean they came from there. No, it doesn't, I said. That's why I'm not opening them. Alyssa paced once toward the kitchen and stopped when I held up my hand. Stay where the photographs show you were, I said, until someone documents this properly. You're talking to me like I'm a suspect. I'm talking to both of us like we may become suspects. The words stopped her. Alyssa lowered herself into the chair nearest the wall and kept her hands visible on her knees. I called the local police department. The dispatcher's voice remained calm as I gave my name, address, and a short description of what we had found. I did not say my father had planted diamonds. I did not say Alyssa had stolen something from the empty compartment. Both were possibilities, not facts. The first patrol car arrived 9 minutes later. Detective Lena Torres came 20 minutes after that, wearing a charcoal coat beaded with rain. Another officer photographed the room while Torres asked us to remain in separate areas. Naomi arrived before the first pouch was opened. Torres was a compact woman with steady brown eyes and a voice that never hurried. She listened to my account, then asked Alyssa to repeat hers. From the kitchen doorway, I heard my sister explain the rocking box and the raised tray. Did you find 3 pouches? Torres asked. Yes, there were 3, Alyssa said. Was the 4th compartment empty when you opened it? A pause followed. It lasted long enough for the refrigerator motor to start humming. It was already empty, my sister replied. Torres did not challenge her. The detective simply wrote something down. The pouches were placed into separate evidence bags. I watched from several feet away as the officer sealed each one, marked the time, and initialed the labels. Only after that did Torres tell us why she had come so quickly. Bell and Daughters Jewelers had reported a burglary late Christmas morning. According to Gerald, someone had entered the store on Christmas Eve and taken 12 loose stones from the secured inventory room. Alyssa gripped the edge of her chair. Dad never told me about a burglary. You work there? Torres asked. I handle clients and marketing. I wasn't scheduled yesterday. Torres turned to me. What was your position? I haven't worked there in 5 years. But you used to handle inventory? Yes, that was part of my job. The detective's eyes rested on me for half a breath longer than they had on Alyssa. Did you retain any keys or access credentials? No. My alarm code and building access were supposed to be removed when I left. The front door opened before Torres could ask another question. Gerald entered first, bringing a gust of cold air and the heavy scent of his cedar aftershave. Linda followed him, one hand pressed to the collar of her wool coat. My father looked at the evidence bags on the table and stopped. It was a fine performance. His eyebrows lifted, his mouth opened, and one hand came up as if the sight had struck him in the chest. Only his gaze betrayed him. It went first to the empty 4th compartment, not to the 3 sealed pouches. Those are from my store, Gerald said. Torres stepped between him and the table. Sir, please don't approach the evidence. I'm the victim here. That will be determined through the investigation. Gerald looked at me. What have you done? Nothing since calling the police, I said. Linda stood near the door, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. She had not greeted either daughter. My father turned to Torres. Samantha still knew the alarm system. She used to say the business should have been hers. I said I wanted an independent inventory before I left, I replied. That isn't the same thing. Gerald gave a tired little laugh, the one he used when he wanted a room to believe I was exhausting him. She said she would take what belonged to her, he told Torres. When did she say that? The detective asked. 5 years ago. Who heard it? My wife heard everything. Every face turned toward Linda. My mother's hand stopped moving on her ring. There was an argument, she said. Samantha was upset. That wasn't my question, Torres replied. Did she say she would take property from the store? Linda glanced at Gerald, then at the floor. I don't remember the exact words. My father's jaw tightened. Linda, you know what she said. Naomi stepped beside me. My client will answer further questions in a formal interview. For now, I advise everyone to stop turning a newly discovered box into a family debate. Gerald's attention shifted to her. Only guilty people need lawyers this fast. Be careful with that claim, Naomi said. Statements like that tend to age badly. For the first time that morning, the corner of my mouth almost lifted. Torres asked Gerald and Linda to wait in the living room while she finished with us. My father obeyed, though every step said he believed obedience was something other people owed him. The detective returned to the table carrying a thin folder. The store's alarm company sent a preliminary activity report, Torres said. This does not establish who entered the code. It only tells us which user code was entered and when. Naomi nodded once. Please continue. Torres opened the folder and turned a single page toward me. A familiar employee number sat beside a timestamp from Christmas Eve. I had typed that number thousands of times during the 16 years I worked at Bell & Daughters. Gerald had stood beside me on my last day and promised it would be deleted before I reached the parking lot. The code used at 11:42 on Christmas Eve was yours, Torres said. Rain tapped the windows behind me. From the living room came the soft sound of my father clearing his throat, as if he were already preparing to explain me to another stranger. I had left his store 5 years earlier, but Gerald had kept one door open in my name, and someone had walked through it. Naomi closed the folder before my father could see the page from the living room. An employee code is not a person, she said. Whoever entered it had access to the keypad and knew the numbers. Detective Torres nodded. That's correct. At this stage, it's one piece of information. Gerald leaned forward from the couch. It was her private code. No one else had it. I turned toward him. You assigned it to me, and you used it for 16 years, until you said you deleted it. My father's eyes narrowed, but Torres raised one hand before he could answer. We're going to finish this at the station, she said, separately. Naomi requested time for me to change clothes and collect my identification. Torres agreed, though an officer remained outside my house while I went upstairs. That detail mattered. I had not been arrested, and the detective had not ordered me to stay in Connecticut. Still, the patrol car at my curb told every neighbor that Christmas had followed me home in a way no wreath or string of lights could hide. I dressed in dark slacks and a gray sweater, then packed my phone charger, prescription bottle, and the folder where I kept old employment records from Bell & Daughters. Naomi stopped me when she saw it. Do not hand over anything until we review it, she said. It contains emails from when I left. Then it may help you, but helpful documents can still be misunderstood when you surrender them without context. That was the first time she corrected me that day. It would not be the last. At the station, Torres placed me in a small interview room with beige walls and a table bolted to the floor. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Naomi sat beside me, legal pad open, while the detective arranged several pages in front of her. Torres began with Christmas Eve. I had been at home preparing a valuation report for an estate attorney in Hartford. My building's lobby camera recorded me collecting a grocery delivery at 7:23. A video call with the attorney began at 8 and lasted until 9:16. At 10:41, I emailed him a revised inventory spreadsheet from my home network. That still leaves time before 11:42, Torres said. It does. You could have driven to the store. It takes about 28 minutes without holiday traffic. So it was possible. Possible isn't the same as proven. Torres watched me for a moment, then made a note. When did you last enter Bell & Daughters? 5 years ago, on the day I resigned. You never went back for a family event, a holiday sale, or to visit your sister? No. That's unusual. So was the way I left. The detective turned to a different page. Your father says you were dismissed after losing a client's sapphire. Naomi's pen stopped moving. I didn't lose it, I said. What happened? The velvet pouch on Torres's desk pulled me back to the repair room at Bell & Daughters, where the lights were too white and every work surface smelled of metal polish. The sapphire had belonged to an older client named Eleanor Pike. Oval cut, deep blue, just under 6 carats. She brought it in because one prong on her ring had bent. I photographed every piece before repair. That was standard procedure when I supervised inventory, though Gerald complained that I made simple jobs take too long. 3 days later, the stone on the jeweler's tray looked wrong. The color was close, but the inclusions were not. Natural stones carry tiny internal marks, no two quite alike. Eleanor's sapphire had a pale feather near one edge and a narrow line running beneath the surface. The replacement stone had neither. I checked the intake photographs twice, then asked Calvin Ross, our bench jeweler, whether the sapphire had been moved. Calvin kept his eyes on the polishing wheel. You should talk to your father, he said. Gerald was in his office with the door half closed. When I showed him the photographs, he barely looked at them. You mixed up the bags, he said. I logged the stone myself. Then you logged it wrong. The inclusions don't match. My father leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Are you accusing someone? I'm asking where Eleanor's sapphire is. That sounds like an accusation. He called Alyssa into the office, though she had nothing to do with repairs. Then he brought in my mother. 4 people stood there, while Gerald explained that I had made an inventory mistake and was trying to blame the store. I still remembered Alyssa's shoes that day. Red heels, too high for a work shift, with one black mark near the left toe. My mind fixed on that mark because the rest of the room had become too loud. Gerald placed a resignation letter on his desk. If this reaches the client, we lose her trust, he said. You can leave quietly, or I can report the missing sapphire under your supervision. I didn't take it. I didn't say you did. That was how he worked. He left the ugliest sentence unfinished, then punished you for hearing it. What did you do? Torres asked, pulling me back into the interview room. I resigned. You didn't contact the client? No. The police? No. Your insurer? No. Why not? My thumb pressed against the edge of the table until the metal bit into my skin. At the time, the store employed 9 people, I said. Calvin's wife was receiving cancer treatment. 2 sales associates were close to retirement. The building loan was tied to my parents' house. My mother said an investigation would destroy everyone. So you walked away? Yes. Torres did not soften her expression. That decision makes it harder to verify your account now. I know. Naomi glanced at me. But she did not interrupt. There was nothing to object to. 5 years earlier, I had chosen distance over disclosure, and Gerald had used the silence better than I had. Torres asked whether I believed my father had stolen Eleanor's sapphire. I believed the stone had been switched, I said. I didn't know who switched it. Do you know now? No. That answer tasted bitter, but it was the only honest one. The formal interview lasted almost 3 hours. By the time Naomi and I stepped outside, freezing rain had turned to wet snow. My phone displayed 12 missed calls, 4 from Alyssa and 8 from my mother. There was also an email from a longtime client named Margaret Sloan. Samantha, I heard about the Bell store. Given the circumstances, I'm going to postpone next week's appraisal. I hope you understand. Margaret's estate contained jewelry worth more than $200,000. Losing the assignment would wipe out most of my January income. I called her from the passenger seat of Naomi's car. I haven't been charged with anything, I said after Margaret answered. I know, she replied. But the police found stolen property at your home. They found it inside a gift my father sent. That's what I heard. The pause told me where the story had come from. Did Gerald call you? I asked. He said the family was going through a private matter. My father had spent 5 years warning people that I could not be trusted around valuable property. Now he was calling those same people before I had even left the police station. I understand your decision, I said. Margaret sounded relieved. Thank you for being reasonable. The call ended, and Naomi pulled away from the curb. You don't have to make everyone comfortable while they damage you, she said. Arguing wouldn't bring the contract back. No, but pretending it doesn't cost you won't help either. I looked out at the slush collecting along the road. What should I do? Document every canceled job. Save every message. Your father is creating a record, and so are we. At home, I found Alyssa sitting in her car across the street. She climbed out when Naomi parked, then followed us inside. Dad told the staff you planted the diamonds, Alyssa said, before removing her coat. Naomi shut the door. Did he say that directly? He said the police found store property in Sam's possession and that no one should discuss the burglary. That isn't the same statement, I said. Alyssa stared at me. You're correcting the wording now? The wording is the difference between what he implied and what he can deny later. My sister dropped her purse onto a chair. You always talk like everything is a deposition, and you always leave out the part that could hurt you. Her mouth tightened. Naomi stepped between us without moving from beside the door. This conversation ends if either of you starts making accusations. I turned toward Alyssa. There were 4 compartments. One was empty. Why did the box lean to one side? I don't know. You said it rocked on the counter. Because the bottom was uneven. The empty compartment was on the side you said was heavier. Alyssa's face changed so quickly I almost missed it. Her gaze moved toward the hallway, then back to me. You think I took something. I think your account doesn't fit the box. Maybe Dad left one compartment empty. Maybe he did. Then say you don't know. I already told the detective what happened. No, you told her a version that protects you. Alyssa grabbed her purse. This is why no one can talk to you, she said. You decide what happened before anyone finishes a sentence. And you avoid finishing sentences when the ending might cost you something? The front door shook when she slammed it. Naomi waited until the sound of Alyssa's car faded. You may be right, she said. But if she has evidence, making her defensive reduces the chance she gives it to us. I wasn't trying to make her defensive. That doesn't change the result. I walked back to the dining room. The box was gone, but a faint square of moisture remained where the evidence bag had rested. My sister lies when she's cornered, and you corner people when you're afraid they're lying. I looked at Naomi. Is this the part where you tell me to trust her? No, this is the part where I tell you to stop confusing pressure with control. Before I could answer, my mother called again. Linda's voice came through thin and breathless. Your father had chest pain. Did he go to the hospital? He took medication and lay down. Then call his doctor. How can you be so cold? I'm telling you to get him medical care. He wouldn't be in this condition if you had handled the box privately. There it was. Not a question about whether I had stolen anything. Not concern over who placed diamonds beneath the chocolates. Only anger that strangers had been allowed to see inside the family. Dad called the police about a burglary, I said. There was no private way to return possible evidence. You could have called us first. He called me first. Then he screamed because Alyssa had the box. My mother lowered her voice. Gerald was embarrassed. It was meant for you. What did he tell you was inside? Nothing. I don't know anything about the box. What about my alarm code? A pause stretched across the line. That system is old, Linda said. Codes stay in computers. Dad told me mine was deleted. I don't remember that. You were standing beside him when he said it. That's not how I remember it. I opened the legal pad from the morning and wrote her exact words beneath Gerald's. Did you hear me threaten to take jewelry when I left the store? I asked. You said many hurtful things. That wasn't my question. Why are you interrogating your own mother? Because Dad told a detective you heard me threaten him. Linda's breath caught, but her answer arrived with the same tired softness she had used throughout my childhood. Can't we all just get through this without destroying one another? He used my code during a burglary. You don't know that Gerald used it. No, but someone did, and he kept it active. You're making assumptions again. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them. From now on, anything about the investigation goes through Naomi. Samantha, don't do this. I'm not discussing evidence with you or Dad. You'll regret treating your family like criminals. The call ended. That evening, I searched the old external drive, where I had saved my final months of work emails. One message to Gerald appeared 6 days before I resigned. Please confirm in writing that my alarm code and all remote access will be disabled on my final day. His reply contained 4 words. Consider it taken care of. I forwarded the exchange to Naomi and placed the drive in a paper envelope. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I never drank. At 9:17, Detective Torres called. An independent examiner completed the initial check on the first pouch, she said. One diamond has a laser inscription matching the store's reported loss schedule. My grip tightened around the phone. Which stone? I can't give you the full inventory yet. Does the inscription prove it was at the store on Christmas Eve? No, it identifies the diamond. It does not establish when it disappeared or who possessed it. That distinction mattered, but it would not matter to everyone. Torres continued. The stone was found in a box addressed to you, and your user code was entered at the store. I need you to understand how that looks. I understand. After the call, a message from Alyssa appeared on my screen. Stop asking about the fourth compartment. I read it twice. Then another message arrived from an unknown number. The police found one of our missing diamonds in your box. Do the smart thing before this gets worse. There was no signature, but my father had used the phrase, do the smart thing, on the day he forced me out of Bell and Daughters. One stolen diamond now carried my name in 2 places. It had been hidden in my Christmas gift. While my old code had opened the store on Christmas Eve, Gerald had not planted a single piece of evidence. He had built a path, and every step pointed toward me. The unknown number never answered when I called back. Naomi told me not to try again. Screenshot the message, export the conversation, and send both to me, she said. Then leave it alone. What if it was Dad? What if it wasn't? You don't improve evidence by chasing the person who created it. I followed her instructions. Though every part of me wanted to hear Gerald's voice and force him to explain why a diamond from his store had arrived beneath my Christmas candy. The next morning, Naomi called while I was standing in line at the bank. My checking account had dropped below the amount I normally kept as a safety cushion, and 2 more clients had postponed appraisal work. We found the chocolatier, she said. I stepped away from the other customers and stood beside a display of home equity brochures. What did they say? The owner remembers your father. That was not surprising. Gerald made sure people remembered him, especially when he was spending money. The shop was a small family-owned business in West Hartford, known for holiday gift boxes and hand-painted truffles. Naomi had contacted Detective Torres before making inquiries, so the owner understood that the packaging might matter in an investigation. Gerald had ordered the box on December 21st. He had not chosen it from the holiday display. He requested a deeper wooden tray and asked whether the space beneath it could hold a folded letter and a keepsake. The standard tray wasn't thick enough, Naomi said. The owner offered to assemble the box around whatever he wanted to include, but your father refused. He picked it up unfinished and said he would add the personal item at home. Did they ship it? No. He collected it himself. My father had told Torres the box came directly from the chocolatier. Is there video? I asked. The shop voluntarily preserved its security footage. Torres is handling the formal collection. I watched snow slide down the bank's front window in wet sheets. So Dad had the box before it reached me. Yes. That doesn't prove he put the diamonds inside. No, and you need to keep saying that to yourself. It proves he lied about how the package reached you. Nothing more yet. Naomi's caution irritated me because it was correct. The chocolatier's receipt showed Gerald had paid cash, but the order form carried his name, phone number, and a note in his handwriting. Deeper insert, no exterior change. Someone who only wanted to include a letter would not have cared whether the exterior looked different. Before we ended the call, Naomi added one more thing. Torres requested your sister's phone again. Did Alyssa agree? She hasn't responded. I knew where Alyssa would be. Bell and Daughters had remained closed after the burglary, but my sister kept an office above a dry cleaner 2 blocks away. She used it for social media work and private appointments, whenever Gerald wanted the store to appear busier than it was. Naomi told me not to go there. I went anyway. That was my mistake. Alyssa's car was parked behind the building, dusted with old snow. I climbed the narrow stairs and heard her talking before I reached the office door. I told you, I didn't show her anything, she said. Silence followed while someone spoke on the other end. No, Dad, I deleted those. I stopped with my hand above the doorknob. Alyssa's voice dropped. She saw the box. What was I supposed to do? Another pause. Then she said, I know. I'll fix it. The call ended. I knocked once and opened the door. My sister stood beside her desk with the phone still in her hand. A scented candle burned near the window, trying and failing to cover the smell of dry cleaning chemicals from downstairs. "How long were you listening?" Alyssa asked. "Long enough to hear you promise Dad you'd fix something. It wasn't about you. Then what did you delete?" Her thumb moved across the screen. "Put the phone down," I said. "You don't get to order me around. Torres asked for that phone, and my lawyer hasn't told me to give it to her." "You have a lawyer?" "I'm getting one." Alyssa slid the device into her purse. "Dad ordered the box himself," I said. "He asked for a false bottom and picked it up before it was delivered to me." Her face stayed still, but the hand holding her purse strap tightened. "He told me it came from the store," she said. "He lied. Maybe he wanted to put jewelry in it as a surprise." "There was jewelry in it." "You know what I mean." "No, I don't. Explain it." Alyssa walked behind her desk, putting furniture between us. "You came here to accuse me." "I came because you told me to stop asking about the fourth compartment. There was nothing in it." "Then why are you afraid of the question?" "I'm afraid of you deciding I stole something and feeding that to the police. You already lied to Torres." Her cheeks flushed. "You don't know that. The box had 4 fitted spaces, 3 pouches remained. Dad panicked when he learned you had it. And now he's asking whether you showed me something." "I told you what I found." "No, you told me what you brought." Alyssa looked toward the window. That movement gave me my answer, but I pressed harder anyway. "What was in the 4th pouch? Get out. Did you take a diamond? Leave my office. If you kept property from a reported burglary, you are making this worse every hour." Alyssa grabbed a ceramic mug from the desk and threw it into the sink. It struck the metal basin and broke into 2 pieces. "You think you're the only person Dad ever hurt?" she demanded. "You walked away. I stayed. You stayed because he paid every bill you created. At least I didn't abandon Mom. I left a business that was switching client stones. And you reported nothing. You protected yourself, then came back 5 years later pretending you're the only honest person in the room. The accusation landed because part of it was true. Still, I refused to stop." "What did you take from the box?" Alyssa picked up her coat. "This is why nobody tells you anything. You don't listen. You cross-examine. And you hide whatever might cost you." She brushed past me and pulled the door open. "Dad was right about one thing," my sister said. "You don't care who gets destroyed as long as you get to prove you were right." The door slammed behind her. I stood alone beside the broken mug, listening to her footsteps race down the stairs. Naomi did not raise her voice when I told her what I had done. She did not need to. "You entered her workplace after I advised you not to," she said. "You overheard a call without knowing the other person's words, then confronted a frightened witness. She has the 4th diamond. You suspect she does." She practically admitted it. "No." She became angry. "Those are not the same thing." I paced between my kitchen and dining room, phone pressed to my ear. What was I supposed to do? Let her attorney arrange a voluntary interview. Let Torres collect the phone through consent or proper legal process. Stop treating every unanswered question like a lock you can force open. She's protecting him. She may also be protecting herself. That doesn't excuse lying. "No, but your job is not to punish her into honesty." I stopped beside the empty space where the chocolate box had rested. Naomi continued. "You're good at identifying objects because objects don't become more deceptive when they feel cornered. People do." The sentence stayed with me after the call ended. At 6 that evening, Alyssa sent one message. "You always wanted me to admit I was the bad daughter. Congratulations." I typed 3 replies and erased them all. The 4th was shorter. "I will not promise to protect you from the consequences of what you did. I will promise not to lie about you. If there was something in that compartment, call Naomi." Alyssa did not answer that night. She called at 7 the next morning. Her voice sounded rough, as though she had been awake for hours. "Is Naomi with you?" she asked. "I can call her. I don't want the police at my apartment." "That depends on what you have." My sister went quiet. "There was a 4th pouch," she said. I sat down at the kitchen table. "Where is it?" "In my safe." "Did you open it?" "Yes." "What did you find?" "A loose diamond." "Why did you keep it?" Alyssa inhaled slowly. "Because I'd seen it before. I wanted to ask 10 questions at once, but Naomi's words returned. People become more deceptive when cornered. Tell me where, I said. Dad showed it to me last spring. My events company owed almost $70,000, and the bank was threatening to sue. He said he had a stone we could use as collateral until a client payment came through. Did he tell you who owned it? He said it belonged to the family. Did you take it to a lender? A pause followed. Yes. Under your name? Under the company's. And after the loan was paid? Dad took the stone back. Alyssa's breathing turned uneven. When I saw it in the chocolate box, I thought he'd put it there because of me. I thought maybe he was trying to show the police I'd stolen it. So you hid it. I panicked. You also lied to me and Torres. I know. The words came without excuses, which made them heavier. I need you to listen carefully, I said. Do not move the diamond, do not clean it, photograph it closely, or take it out again. Call Naomi from another phone if you're worried about yours. She'll arrange the surrender. Will I be arrested? I don't know. You could tell them I didn't understand. I can tell them what I personally know, nothing more. Alyssa made a small sound that might have been a laugh without humor. You really mean that? Yes. Dad would lie for me. That's one of the reasons we're here. Naomi arranged everything before noon. Alyssa retained her own attorney, who coordinated a voluntary transfer at his office. Detective Torres documented the sealed pouch, Alyssa's safe, and the route by which the item entered evidence. I was not present for the surrender. 2 days later, Naomi invited me to her office for an update. Torres joined by video, along with an independent gemologist who had examined the stone under controlled conditions. The laser inscription is intact, the gemologist said. The diamond is not listed among the 12 stones reported stolen on Christmas. Relief came first, brief and useless. If it was not on the lost schedule, that did not explain why Gerald had hidden it. The examiner rotated a magnified image on the screen. The stone had an older European cut, with a small table and broad facets that reflected light differently from modern diamonds. Near one edge, a thin feather-shaped inclusion curved toward the center. I had seen that mark before. Not at Bell and Daughters, not in an inventory book. In a photograph? My grandmother Ruth used to wear a platinum ring on her right hand. Every Christmas, she let Alyssa and me try on pieces from her jewelry box while our mother warned us not to touch anything with sticky fingers. One year, Gerald photographed me holding the ring beneath a lamp. The diamond had caught the light, and the feather inside it looked like a tiny white branch. That stone belonged to my grandmother, I said. Torres leaned closer to her screen. Do you have documentation? Possibly. My mother said the ring was sold 5 years ago. Why was it sold? To cover losses after the sapphire incident. No one spoke for a moment. Gerald had told the whole family that my mistake cost them Ruth's ring. Linda repeated the story whenever I questioned why my parents had cut me out of family decisions. Naomi asked whether I had photographs or an old appraisal. I kept digital copies of nearly every family jewelry document I had handled while working at the store. That evening, I searched 2 external drives and an old cloud folder. The photograph appeared first. Alyssa and I were standing beside our grandmother's Christmas tree, both wearing paper crowns from dinner crackers. The ring sat loose on my finger. The appraisal certificate was buried in a folder labeled Ruth Estate. It listed the carat weight, cut, color, and the same inclusion pattern described by the independent examiner. Then I saw the date at the bottom. The original certificate had been issued years earlier, but a second page documented a later reappraisal. I called Linda. Mom, when was Grandma's ring sold? I asked. My mother sighed before answering. After the problem with Mrs. Pike's sapphire. What month? I don't remember. You told me Dad sold it to cover the loss. He did. I have the appraisal. Linda's voice sharpened. Why are you digging through private family records? Because the diamond from Grandma's ring was in the chocolate box. That's impossible. Was the ring ever sold? Your father handled it. That isn't an answer. You caused a terrible financial strain, Samantha. We did what we had to do. I looked at the reappraisal date again. Who took the ring to be examined 2 years after you said it was gone? Silence filled the line. Then Linda disconnected. The certificate remained open on my screen. My mother said the ring had been sold 5 years earlier, when I left Bell and Daughters. The reappraisal was dated 2 years after that. For 5 years, they had let me carry the cost of a family treasure that had never been lost. Linda did not answer my calls for the rest of the day. By the following morning, Naomi had arranged a meeting at her office. My mother refused at first, then agreed after Naomi explained that the diamond from Grandma Ruth's ring was now part of an active investigation. Gerald was not invited. Linda arrived 10 minutes late in a camel-colored coat and pearl earrings, dressed as if she were attending a church luncheon, instead of explaining why she had let one daughter carry a lie for 5 years. She sat across from me without taking off her gloves. "This has gone far enough," she said. Naomi closed the conference room door. "Mrs. Bell, you are here voluntarily. Samantha has several questions, and I advise you to answer only what you know to be true." My mother looked at her, then back at me. "I don't need legal advice to speak to my own child." "You may need it to speak about property now held as evidence," Naomi replied. The overhead lights reflected off Linda's wedding ring as she twisted it around her finger. I placed a copy of the reappraisal certificate on the table. "Was Grandma's ring ever sold?" I asked. Linda pressed her lips together. "Your father handled the finances. Was it sold?" The family was under terrible pressure after the sapphire went missing. "That isn't what I asked." Her fingers stopped moving. "The setting was not sold," she said at last. A soft click came from Naomi's pen. "What happened to the diamond?" I asked. "Gerald removed it." "When?" "After you left the store." "And what did he do with it?" My mother glanced toward Naomi. "He said he could use it as temporary security for a business loan. So the ring was never sold to cover a loss I caused." "You were responsible for the inventory problem." "The sapphire was not lost under my supervision." "That's your version." I slid the certificate closer. "This stone was reappraised 2 years after you told me it was gone. You knew the setting still existed. You knew Dad had the diamond." Linda's face tightened. "I knew some of it." "How much?" "Enough to understand that the business was struggling." "Did you know he blamed me for selling Grandma's ring?" "He didn't blame you. He said your departure created expenses. He told me my mistake forced him to sell it. You had already decided we were the enemy." I sat back and looked at the woman across from me. Linda's hair was smooth, her makeup careful, and the gloves remained buttoned at her wrists. She had prepared herself to survive the conversation without letting any part of it touch her skin. "You let me believe I cost Grandma's ring?" I asked. My mother's gaze shifted to the certificate. "Your father said you were already leaving," she replied. "I didn't see what telling you would change." The room went quiet except for the low hum of the heating vent. "It would have changed what I believed about myself," I said. Linda blinked several times. For one brief second, her mouth softened, and I thought she might apologize. Then she leaned forward. "Your father could lose everything," she said. "The store, the house, his health. Is proving a point worth that?" "This is not about a point. It has always been about being right with you." Naomi set down her pen. "Mrs. Bell, your husband reported a burglary. Diamonds connected to his store were found in a box he personally delivered. A family stone was hidden with them. And your daughter's old alarm code was used. Those facts exist whether Samantha discusses them or not." Linda's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Gerald has chest pains every night." "Then he should see a cardiologist," I said. "You sound like a stranger." "You asked me to carry a lie because the truth was inconvenient. You don't get to complain that I've changed." My mother pulled off one glove, then the other, placing them in her lap with exact care. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The truth, when investigators ask for it. And after that, I don't know." She looked wounded by the answer, as if uncertainty were cruelty. "Until this investigation is over, all communication about the store, the diamonds, or Dad goes through Naomi," I continued. "Do not come to my house without calling. Do not ask Alyssa to carry messages. Do not tell me I am responsible for Dad's health." Linda gathered her gloves. "You're cutting off your own mother at the worst time of her life." "I'm limiting contact with someone who gave a detective a false version of what I said. I never accused you of stealing. You stood beside the man who did." My mother rose from the chair. "Someday you may need your family. I needed one 5 years ago." She left without looking back. The door had barely closed when Naomi turned to me. "You did well." I wanted her to say she was sorry. That was not likely today. "I know." The words sounded flat. My hands did not. I tucked them beneath the table until the shaking stopped. That afternoon, I received a text from a number I recognized but had not seen in years. The sapphire was never lost. The sender was Calvin Ross. Calvin had worked at Bell & Daughters longer than I had. He repaired engagement rings, rebuilt antique settings, and could identify most precious metals by the sound they made against his bench. After my resignation, he ignored every email I sent. I showed the message to Naomi. "Do not ask leading questions," she said. "Arrange a meeting in public. Tell Torres before you go." Calvin chose a diner beside Route 44, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a pie case near the register. When I arrived, he was already seated in the back, stirring coffee he had not tasted. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders had narrowed, and the skin around his eyes had the gray cast of someone who had spent years sleeping badly. "You brought your lawyer?" he asked when Naomi sat beside me. "I brought someone who will remember every word correctly." Calvin gave a tired nod. A waitress poured coffee for us, then left. He watched her cross the room before speaking. "Eleanor Pike's sapphire was real when it came in," he said. "You logged it right. What happened after that?" "Gerald removed it from the repair envelope." "Did you see him?" "I saw the stone on his desk. Later he gave me a synthetic sapphire and told me to reset it." My fingers tightened around the warm ceramic cup. "Did he say why?" "He said Eleanor would never know the difference. And when I found the mismatch," Calvin looked down. "He told me to keep my mouth shut." "Why did you?" His spoon clicked against the saucer. My wife had just started treatment. Gerald loaned me money for the deductible, then added me to the store health plan when she reduced her hours. I owed him more than I could repay. "That does not explain why you let him blame me." "No," Calvin said. "It doesn't." The answer carried no excuse, which was more than my mother had offered. "Where did the real sapphire go?" Naomi asked. "I don't know. Gerald moved stones through different trays and changed tags. Sometimes they returned, sometimes they didn't." "Did you alter records?" "Not the computer records. I replaced labels and reset stones." "Will you give a formal statement?" Naomi asked. Calvin rubbed both hands over his face. "Not yet." "Why contact Samantha if you won't speak officially?" "Because Gerald told everyone she lost that stone." "She didn't. An unofficial confession does not clear her," Naomi said. "I know." Calvin reached into his jacket and placed a small flash drive on the table. "I saved workbench photographs," he said. "Not everything. Enough to remember what I handled." Naomi did not touch it. "We will arrange a documented transfer," she said. "Keep possession until then." Calvin's eyes moved to me. "I should have said something 5 years ago." "Yes," I replied. He flinched, but I did not soften the answer. A few minutes after leaving the diner, Naomi's office received a call from Miriam Hale. I remembered Miriam as a quiet widow in her late 60s who wore her husband's wedding band on a chain around her neck. She had brought her anniversary ring to Bell & Daughters 6 months earlier because one of the prongs had snagged on a sweater. "My diamond looks different," she told me over the phone. "Gerald said my eyesight had changed." "What looks different about it?" "It doesn't catch the light the same way, and there's a dark speck I never saw before." "Do you have the original certificate?" "Yes." "Please do not take the ring back to Bell & Daughters. Naomi can give you the name of an independent appraiser." Miriam's voice trembled. "Do you think they replaced it?" "I don't know yet." It was the hardest answer, and the only responsible one. The independent examination took several days. Miriam's current stone matched neither the measurements nor the inclusion map on her original certificate. It was a lower-grade diamond, smaller by more than half a carat. When Naomi told me, I drove to Miriam's house with her permission. She lived in a white cape near Simsbury, with bird feeders hanging outside the kitchen window and a stack of library books beside the sofa. The ring sat inside a plastic evidence sleeve on her dining table. "My husband saved for 3 years to buy that," she said. "We were married 41 years. I looked at the thin gold setting and imagined Gerald holding it beneath the white lights of the repair room, deciding that a grieving widow would be easier to fool than a bank." Miriam touched the edge of the evidence sleeve. "I don't care what it's worth," she said. "I want the one he gave me." Until then, every move I had made had been about removing my name from my father's story. The alarm code, the chocolate box, the old sapphire, all of it formed a cage around me, and I had been testing each bar for weakness. Miriam's ring changed the size of the room. My father had not only prepared to sacrifice me, He had taken pieces of other people's lives and counted on their age, grief, or trust to keep them quiet. I wrote down the names of every customer I could remember who had left valuable jewelry for repair or consignment during my final 2 years at the store. Then I stopped before contacting anyone. Naomi had warned me that reaching out could be portrayed as influencing witnesses or building a campaign against Gerald. Instead, we sent the list to Torres with an explanation of how it had been compiled. The response from my father came the next morning. Bell and Daughters filed a complaint with the State Gemological Association, accusing me of soliciting clients during an active investigation. A neighborhood social media page posted a cropped photograph of the police car outside my house beneath the caption, "Family feud turns criminal. Gerald did not need to sign his name." The comments carried his phrasing. She has always been unstable around the business. She wanted the store for herself. Her parents tried to help her. Another client canceled an appraisal. Then a second. By the end of the week, nearly half my scheduled January work was gone. I opened a separate savings account statement and calculated how long I could pay Naomi without touching my retirement fund. The answer was not comforting, but it was clear. I transferred money from the reserve I had built over 11 years and documented every legal payment. Gerald had expected fear of losing income to bring me back under control. Instead, it gave the damage a dollar amount. Calvin's flash drive was transferred through his attorney 2 days later. Torres arranged for a forensic copy, and Naomi received access to the approved images. Most showed ordinary repairs, bent prongs, broken clasps, loose stones beside handwritten tags. Then one photograph stopped me. Eleanor Pike's natural sapphire rested on Calvin's work tray. The pale feather near the edge was visible beneath the bench light, as was the narrow internal line I remembered. A date stamp appeared in the lower corner. The photograph had been taken 11 days after I resigned from Bell and Daughters. The sapphire had never been missing while I controlled the inventory. It had remained inside my father's store after he forced me out and told the entire community I could not be trusted. Gerald had known I was innocent from the beginning. The photograph of Eleanor Pike's sapphire did not prove where Gerald had sent it, but it proved something almost as important. He had built my disgrace around a stone that was still inside his store. Naomi forwarded the image and its metadata to Detective Torres, while Calvin's attorney arranged a formal interview. I expected that to bring immediate relief. Instead, Torres called the following afternoon and reminded me that a photograph could establish possession on a certain date without explaining what happened afterward. "We have to build the timeline, one transaction at a time," she said. "I understand. Do you?" Her question irritated me enough that I almost answered too quickly. "Yes," I said. "I understand that proving my father lied about the sapphire does not prove he staged the Christmas burglary." "That distinction will protect you," Torres replied. "Keep making it." After the call, Naomi slid a retainer statement across her desk. The first month of legal work had consumed almost a third of the savings I kept outside my retirement accounts. I paid it that afternoon. It hurt, but I did not raid my future or ask anyone in my family for help. Gerald had spent years making money feel like a leash. I refused to hand him another one. Alyssa contacted me 2 days later through her attorney. She wanted to meet. Naomi arranged for all 4 of us to sit in a conference room at the attorney's office. Alyssa wore a black turtleneck and no makeup, which made the pale circles beneath her eyes impossible to miss. A thick envelope rested on the table in front of her. "I brought records from my events company," she said. Her attorney placed one hand over the envelope. "My client is providing these voluntarily, with the understanding that we are not conceding criminal intent." Naomi nodded. "No one here can promise how investigators will interpret them." Alyssa looked at me. "Can you at least tell Torres I didn't know the stones were stolen?" "I can tell her you said you didn't know. You know Dad handled all the inventory. I know he controlled it. I also know you took jewelry to a lender. My company was collapsing. That explains why you needed money. It doesn't explain why you didn't ask who owned the collateral." Her eyes flashed. "You think I wanted any of this?" "No. I think you wanted the debt gone, and you chose not to look closely at how Dad made that happen." The attorney beside her shifted in his chair, but Alyssa kept her gaze on me. "If I give them everything, I could lose my business. You may. My apartment too. That may happen. Her mouth opened, then closed. For most of our lives, Gerald had taught Alyssa that fear was a signal to find someone else to absorb the cost. Usually that person had been him. Sometimes it had been our mother. More often than I wanted to admit, it had been me. "You're not going to help me," she said. "I am helping by refusing to create another lie." That's easy for you to say. You didn't spend the last 5 years depending on him. I spent the last 5 years rebuilding a career after he told people I couldn't be trusted with jewelry. Alyssa looked down at the envelope. "So, this is punishment." "No, punishment would be me hiding these records until Dad could use them against you. I'm telling you to give the truth before he chooses which pieces to release." Her attorney removed his hand. Inside the envelope were bank statements, loan agreements, emails, and pawn receipts from 3 different lenders. Some transactions carried Alyssa's company name. Others listed Bell & Daughters as the source of the collateral. The first receipt concerned a diamond necklace Gerald had described to Alyssa as family inventory. The lender advanced $140,000 against it. Most of that money went directly into the store's operating account. $22,000 paid an overdue balance for Alyssa's events company. She had signed both transfers. "I told myself it was part of my compensation," Alyssa said. "Did Dad tell you that?" "He said the store owed me after I brought in new clients." "That isn't the same thing." "I know that now." A second transaction involved an emerald bracelet. A third concerned a loose diamond that Gerald claimed belonged to an estate the store had already purchased. Each time, Alyssa had delivered the property and collected paperwork. Each time, Gerald directed the money. "You kept copies," Naomi said. "I thought I might need proof that he approved everything." "You knew enough to protect yourself from him," I said. Alyssa looked at me without answering. That silence did not make her innocent. It made her human in a way I had resisted seeing. She had trusted our father when it benefited her, feared him when it did not, and saved records because some part of her knew both things could be true at once. Her attorney arranged to provide the documents to Torres and the insurance investigators under a formal agreement. No one promised Alyssa immunity. She would receive credit for cooperation if she told the truth, but she remained responsible for the money she had used. When the meeting ended, my sister stopped beside the elevator. "Do you hate me?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "No. You don't sound very convincing. I don't know what our relationship is going to be after this." "That means yes. It means I'm not going to promise forgiveness before I know the whole truth." The elevator doors opened. Alyssa stepped inside, then faced me. "Dad would have said whatever made me feel better. That's why you should stop measuring love by how quickly someone removes consequences." The doors closed between us. 3 days later, I met Evan Cole. Evan was a forensic accountant, retained by the insurer after the Christmas claim raised questions. He had the dry voice of a man who trusted spreadsheets more than people, and he wore reading glasses on a cord that tapped his shirt buttons whenever he leaned forward. Naomi joined me at his temporary office inside the insurer's Hartford building. Detective Torres attended by video. Evan had created a large timeline from purchase records, repair tickets, consignment agreements, bank deposits, pawn receipts, and Gerald's insurance claim. Colored markers covered the wall. "Your father reported 12 stones and pieces of jewelry missing on Christmas Eve," Evan said. "We are testing whether each item was physically present at the store immediately before the alleged burglary." He pointed to a line marked with the emerald bracelet Alyssa had pawned. "The store's claim states this bracelet was taken on December 24th. "It was pledged in June," I said. "Correct. The lender still had it on Christmas Eve." "So Dad claimed insurance on property that had already left the store." "That appears to be the case, but we're confirming whether the loan was later redeemed." Evan moved to another line. "A diamond tennis bracelet had been sold to a dealer in New Jersey in August. Bell & Daughters recorded it as inventory through December, then listed it among the stolen items. A loose pear-shaped diamond appeared in a private sale in October. Another stone was tied to a client consignment agreement that had never transferred ownership to the store. Gerald had mixed everything together. Store inventory, customer property, items already pawned, pieces already sold, 12 losses on paper, but not 12 objects sitting in the vault on Christmas Eve. Why would the insurer not catch this immediately? I asked. Claims begin with representations from the policyholder, Evan said. Supporting documents are reviewed, but fraud often depends on making false records appear ordinary. A busy insurer may not know a bracelet was pledged elsewhere until someone checks external transactions. What happens to the claim now? It is on hold. Not denied yet, not approved, frozen while every line was tested. Evan handed me a copy of a repair ticket for Miriam Hale's ring. The ticket listed her original diamond's weight and certificate number. A second internal entry, created weeks later, referred to a different stone. Gerald had marked the change as a correction. He called the real measurement a clerical error, I said. Do you recognize the user account? It was his administrator login. Evan adjusted his glasses. That login appears throughout the inventory system, but usernames can be shared. We need more than account ownership. Calvin supplied the next piece. During his formal interview, he told Torres that Bell and Daughters used a digital microscope to photograph stones before and after repairs. The software saved images locally, then synced them to a cloud account used for client reports. Gerald had erased many local files after the burglary. He had not erased the cloud copies. Access required the insurer, receiver, and investigators to follow the proper process, so the first recovered batch did not arrive for several weeks. When it did, Naomi called me to her office. Miriam's diamond appeared beneath the microscope on the day she brought it in. The old certificate number sat beside the image, while the same feather-shaped mark shown on her original appraisal curved near the stone's edge. A later photograph showed the replacement diamond. Smaller, darker, different internal marks. Between those two images was a workbench photograph of the original stone outside its setting, resting beside a paper tag. The user account attached to the image belonged to Gerald. It still doesn't show who removed it, Naomi warned. No, I said. But it shows the original stone was separated from the ring inside the store. Another group of recovered images showed a diamond being moved from one repair envelope to another. A bracelet reported stolen at Christmas appeared on Calvin's bench in August, then vanished from the system after a tag was changed. The evidence did not arrive as one dramatic confession. It came in dull file names, time stamps, and photographs no one had meant to preserve. That made it harder for Gerald to dismiss. By then, the insurer had appointed Evan to work with a court-approved receiver who would oversee the store's remaining assets. Bell and Daughters stayed closed, and employees received limited pay from restricted accounts while ownership disputes were sorted out. Gerald called each development an attack. A former sales associate forwarded me an email he had sent the staff. Samantha has persuaded outsiders to dismantle the business her grandfather built. Do not cooperate with unauthorized requests. The receiver, insurer, and police were not outsiders. They were the people Gerald had invited into his life the moment he filed a claim. Near the end of January, Evan asked me to review several old certificate formats. I did not authenticate the evidence or handle original files. My role was limited to explaining how Bell and Daughters recorded stones during the years I supervised inventory. One document stopped me. It was the schedule Gerald submitted with the insurance claim. 12 numbered entries listed weights, values, certificate details, and ownership categories. All 12 stones had laser inscriptions or identifying documentation. Nothing had been left blank. 3 entries, however, did not connect to any purchase invoice, client consignment form, estate acquisition, or repair intake. They existed inside Bell and Daughters' inventory system, but there was no original record showing how the store had legally obtained them. Ghost inventory, Evans said. Real stones with manufactured ownership, possibly. We know the certificates are real. We don't yet know why the business claimed ownership. The 3 stones had been included in the Christmas loss schedule with full identifying details. Gerald had reported them stolen and assigned them high values, but there was no clean source document beneath any of them. I studied the certificate numbers. One looked familiar from the 4th pouch, though it was not the same stone. Another appeared in an old handwritten notebook Calvin had preserved. Beside all 3, Gerald had once written a single word. Hold. Could those stones still exist? I asked. If they were never sold or pledged, Evan replied, yes. Then why report them stolen? to collect insurance money, hide their original owners, or both. Torres spoke from the video screen. We do not assume he retained them simply because we haven't located a sale. I'm not assuming, I said. I'm asking where they came from. That is the right question. Evan opened the file history for the claim schedule. Gerald had submitted it on December 26th, after reporting the burglary. On its face, the timing looked normal. Then Evan displayed the metadata from the original document. The first version had been created on December 22nd, 2 days before anyone supposedly broke into Bell and Daughters. I leaned closer to the screen. Could it have been a routine inventory list? That was our first question, Evan said. It was not labeled inventory. The original file name was Christmas Loss Schedule. The first draft already identified the same 12 items as missing. A later version added insurance values. Another inserted the police report number. The list of stolen property itself did not change. Gerald had known which pieces would disappear before the burglary occurred. The emerald bracelet was sitting in a lender's vault. The tennis bracelet had been sold months earlier. Miriam's original diamond had been removed from her ring, while 3 fully documented stones existed only as assets Gerald claimed to own. Christmas Eve had not created the loss. It had given my father a date to place on years of it. By the first week of February, Bell and Daughters still had diamonds in its name, but almost no money it could legally spend. The insurer had frozen Gerald's claim. The bank restricted withdrawals from the store's operating accounts, and the court was considering whether to place the remaining assets under a receiver's control. Employees received 1 reduced paycheck from funds the bank approved, then nothing while the lawyers argued over what belonged to the business and what belonged to customers. Gerald told everyone the same story. His eldest daughter had turned a family misunderstanding into a government investigation because she wanted revenge for losing her job 5 years earlier. I knew the wording because 3 former employees forwarded me copies of the email. Each version contained the same closing line. Please remember that loyalty matters most when a family is under attack. On Wednesday morning, I left Naomi's office and found Carol Winslow waiting beside my car. Carol had worked the front counter at Bell and Daughters since I was in college. Her silver hair was tucked beneath a knitted hat, and the cuffs of her navy coat were frayed. She stood with both hands wrapped around a paper cup that had gone soft from the heat inside it. You have some nerve, she said. I stopped several feet away. Good morning, Carol. Don't talk to me like we're at church. Snowmelt dripped from the parking garage ceiling and struck the concrete between us. My husband's medication is $600 a month, Carol continued. The store insurance ends if Gerald can't reopen. Did you think about that before you handed everything to the police? I didn't close the store. You gave them records. I gave investigators information connected to missing customer property. Carol's mouth tightened. Your father says the diamonds were found in your house. They were found inside a box he sent me. That's not what he told us. I know. She stepped closer. Coffee sloshed through the opening in the plastic lid and ran across her glove. Then fix it, Carol said. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell the insurance company this was a family issue. A customer's diamond was replaced with a cheaper stone. You don't know who did that. No, but I know hiding it would put every customer at risk. What about us? The question stayed between us, heavier than the accusation. Carol had taught me how to wrap engagement rings without leaving fingerprints on the boxes. She brought chicken soup when I had pneumonia at 27 and sent a card every birthday until Gerald pushed me out. None of that gave me the right to trade Miriam Hale's diamond for Carol's health insurance. I'm sorry you're being hurt, I said, but I can't save your job by asking customers to accept stolen property. Her eyes went wet, though her voice remained steady. You always did care more about being correct than being kind. Kind to whom? Carol looked away. A car horn sounded on the street below. She threw the cup into a trash can and walked toward the elevator without answering. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before turning the key. The easier choice would have been to blame Gerald out loud, list every altered record, and tell Carol exactly where her loyalty had taken her. Most of the evidence was not public, and some of it had not been fully verified. Using it to win an argument could have damaged the investigation and turned a frightened employee into another person Gerald could claim I had influenced. So I drove home with her accusations still sitting in the passenger seat. Naomi called before I reached my building. My office received a proposal from your father's attorney, she said. You need to read it here, not alone. Is he offering to confess? No, that would have been out of character. Come back. Gerald's attorney, Martin Shaw, had sent a 6-page confidential settlement proposal. The language was polished enough to make extortion resemble estate planning. Under the proposal, I would issue a statement saying I could not determine who placed the diamonds inside the chocolate box. I would add that Alyssa had possessed the box overnight and might have acted without Gerald's knowledge. In return, my father would transfer a controlling interest in Belle and Daughters to me. Gerald would step down as president. I would oversee an internal review, negotiate with customers, and help the business reopen under new management. The family would decline further public comment, and everyone would work toward a private resolution. One paragraph described the offer as the fulfillment of Gerald's lifelong wish that his eldest daughter carry on the Belle legacy. I read that sentence 3 times. When I was 22, I used to arrive at the store before sunrise and sit at Gerald's desk before anyone else came in. I would run my fingers over the brass nameplate and imagine my own there one day. Not because I wanted his chair, but because I believed I could make the business cleaner, more accurate, and less dependent on whatever story Gerald needed people to believe. For 16 years, I learned every part of the operation. Inventory, appraisals, insurance schedules, estate purchases, repair intake, customer disputes. Then my father pushed me out and handed the front of the business to Alyssa, whose greatest skill was making wealthy clients feel remembered. Now he was offering me everything I had once wanted. Naomi watched from across the table. Say it, I told her. This is not a gift. I know. You're still considering it. I'm considering what could happen to the employees if I refuse. You're considering whether you can repair the store. I closed the proposal. Maybe I can. Then we should discuss what you would actually receive. Naomi pulled a yellow pad toward her and wrote as she spoke. The store had outstanding commercial loans. Customer claims remained unresolved. The insurer might seek recovery for investigative costs. The receiver could challenge transfers made before insolvency. If I accepted control while knowing the records were unreliable, every later certification would carry my name. You would inherit the liabilities along with the shares, Naomi said. Your father could argue that you reviewed the books, accepted ownership, and confirmed the business could continue. I would conduct an independent audit. With what money? The store assets. Some of those assets may belong to customers. I leaned back. Naomi tapped the 2nd page of the proposal. He also wants you to suggest Alyssa may have placed the diamonds in the box. I wouldn't say that. Then there is no deal. He could revise it. He could. He could also disclose every missing item, identify every owner, and cooperate with the receiver. He is not offering any of that. The office radiator knocked behind me. He's transferring the problem, I said. Yes. Along with the Belle name. That name is part of the problem. The proposal had been written to look like an inheritance. In practice, Gerald wanted my signature beneath a ruined balance sheet, and my voice attached to a new suspect. If the store survived, he could say he had handed it to me out of love. If it collapsed, the failure would end under my management. I asked Naomi to draft a rejection. No counteroffer? She asked. None. What reason should we give? The proposal requires me to make statements I cannot support and accept liabilities that have not been disclosed. Naomi nodded. Clean and sufficient. I signed the letter that afternoon. Gerald called less than an hour after Martin Shaw received it. I let the call go to voicemail. You've spent your whole life complaining that I never gave you a chance, my father said in the recording. Now I put the store in your hands, and you're too proud to take it. When those employees lose their homes, remember this was your choice. He ended the message without mentioning the customers whose jewelry had disappeared. Linda arrived at my office the following morning. She had ignored the contact limits I set, but she did not come to discuss Gerald's health. My mother carried a manila folder filled with mortgage documents. Your father says you rejected the store, she said. I rejected his conditions. Martin said it was a generous offer. Martin is Dad's lawyer. Linda placed the folder on my desk. The house secures part of the commercial loan. I know. If the bank accelerates it, we could lose everything. The colonial house in Avon had 4 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a dining room Linda redecorated every 3 years. My parents had bought it when I was 13. Gerald called it proof that Bell and Daughters had raised the family into a better life. "Did you know Dad pledged the house?" I asked. "I signed the documents." "Did you understand them?" "I understood that the store needed support." "How much does the bank claim is outstanding?" Linda looked at the folder. "A little over $700,000. The number settled between us." "What are you asking me to do?" "You have equity in your condominium and retirement savings. The bank may accept a personal guarantee if you take control of the business. You want me to put my home and retirement behind Dad's debt. I want you to keep your mother from becoming homeless. You have not received a foreclosure notice. The lawyer says it could happen. Then you need independent financial advice. I need my daughter." "You're asking for a guarantor?" Linda recoiled as though I had insulted her. "We paid for your college. I repaid the education loan you gave me. We raised you. That does not make me responsible for debts you signed." Her hands flattened against my desk. "Family members help one another. Then Dad can disclose every asset and transaction. Alyssa can account for the money she received. You can cooperate with the receiver. After that, an advisor can tell you what options remain. You know what cooperation will do to Gerald. I know what silence did to everyone else." Linda stared at me, and the familiar tremor entered her voice. "Your father made mistakes because he was trying to keep the store alive. Miriam Hale's husband did not save for 3 years so Dad could use her diamond as a business loan. This is not about that woman. That is exactly who it is about." My mother pulled the mortgage papers back into the folder. "If we lose the house, I will know you could have prevented it. You will know I refused to risk my future without truthful records. So you're abandoning us. I will pay for 1 meeting with an independent financial counselor. I will not guarantee the debt, take ownership of the store, or pay your mortgage." Linda's expression hardened. The tears disappeared so quickly they might never have been there. "Keep your counselor," she said. She left the folder open on my desk, perhaps hoping the numbers would continue arguing after she was gone. I closed it and sent her the contact information anyway. That afternoon, Evan requested a secure video meeting with Naomi and me. His face appeared on the conference room screen beside a folder name printed in plain black letters: Samantha Exposure. The files had been recovered from a backup associated with Gerald's office computer. Some were created weeks before Christmas, while others had been edited after the burglary. One document contained a timeline of my final year at Bell and Daughters. Ordinary disagreements had been rewritten as threats. My request for an independent inventory became evidence that I intended to seize control. A private email in which I wrote, "I will take the records necessary to protect myself," had been cropped to read, "I will take what is necessary." Another file held a scan of my signature copied from an old appraisal form. Gerald had pasted it beneath a draft acknowledgement, stating that I retained knowledge of the store's alarm system after leaving. "That signature was not placed there by me," I said. "We know the file was created 3 weeks ago," Evan replied. "The original form containing your signature is 8 years old." A draft statement for Linda claimed I had threatened to remove jewelry from the store. The wording matched Gerald's first conversation with Torres almost exactly. Beside it sat a document titled Behavioral Concerns. It described me as obsessive, resentful, and emotionally unstable around family property. No doctor, therapist, or employer had written it. Gerald had assembled the language himself from old emails and family arguments. Naomi's jaw tightened. He was not merely responding to suspicion. He was preparing how other people should interpret her. Evan opened the final attachment. 3 diamonds were listed with complete certificate numbers, weights, grades, values, and laser inscriptions. Each appeared in Gerald's insurance loss schedule, and each was described in the folder as property I might have removed from the store. At first glance, the records looked stronger than the other entries. The certificates were real, the inscriptions were valid, the stones existed. Then Evan placed 3 empty columns beside them. No purchase invoices, no consignment agreements, no estate acquisition records, no payments to an owner, dealer, or customer. Could the source documents have been deleted? I asked. We searched the active system, the backups, banking records, email attachments, and the paper files currently controlled by the receiver, Evan said. Nothing shows how Bell and Daughters obtained lawful ownership. Naomi studied the screen. Yet Gerald insured them as store assets. Yes. And included them in a file designed to implicate Samantha. Yes. The 3 certificates sat side by side, polished and official, each one giving a real stone an identity without giving Gerald any right to possess it. These stones exist, Evan said. What does not exist is any lawful reason your father's store should have them. I looked at the 3 laser numbers until they seemed carved into the screen. Gerald had placed them inside the story he prepared against me. But no sale, customer, estate, or legitimate transaction led them into Bell and Daughters. Somewhere beyond those certificates were 3 real diamonds and 3 missing histories. My father had already decided where the blame would go. We still did not know where he had put the stones. The second folder appeared 3 days after Evan showed us the 3 diamonds with no lawful ownership trail. Its name was Alyssa Unauthorized Transfers. Evan opened it during a secure meeting with Naomi, Detective Torres, and an assistant district attorney named Rachel Monroe. Rachel had a calm, narrow face and a habit of removing her glasses before asking a question she already expected someone to avoid. The documents inside looked convincing at first. There were photographs of Alyssa entering 2 pawn shops. Copies of loan agreements carried her signature. Emails showed her asking Gerald when money would reach her events company. A spreadsheet listed transfers from Bell and Daughters into her business account, followed by payments toward credit cards, rent, and a car loan. Anyone seeing only those pages could have concluded that Alyssa had used the jewelry store as her private bank. Then Evan showed us what Gerald had removed. One email began with Alyssa asking, "Are you sure the necklace belongs to the store?" Gerald's reply was missing from the folder, but forensic recovery found it elsewhere. "Stop worrying," I approved it. Another message included instructions from Gerald telling her which lender to use, what value to request, and which description to give if anyone asked about the owner. Those lines had been cropped out. He was building a version in which she acted alone, Naomi said. Rachel put her glasses on the table. "When were these documents assembled?" "Some were collected months ago," Evan replied. The folder itself was created after Christmas. Several files were edited after Mr. Bell began telling investigators Samantha was responsible. Gerald had not chosen between us when the chocolate box left his hands. He had prepared one story with my old alarm code, and another with Alyssa's pawn records. Then waited to see which daughter would be easier to sacrifice. I asked Evan to send the full folder to Alyssa's attorney. Naomi looked at me. "You understand it may increase her exposure. She needs to see everything. You could let her attorney decide what to show her. That would repeat what Dad did. Give her selected pieces, then call the result protection." Rachel studied me from across the screen. "Do not contact your sister alone about the evidence." "I won't." The meeting ended shortly after noon. By 4, Alyssa's attorney had arranged for us to meet the next morning in his office. My sister arrived carrying a large leather tote and a paper cup she never opened. She sat across from me while her lawyer placed printed copies of Gerald's folder between us. At first, Alyssa flipped through the pages quickly. Her expression hardly moved until she reached a photograph taken outside a pawn shop in New Haven. "That was the emerald bracelet," she said. Her attorney pointed to the next page. "Keep reading." The selected email made it appear that Alyssa had chosen the lender and arranged the amount. The complete exchange followed behind it, showing Gerald supplying every instruction. She moved to the spreadsheet. A column labeled Personal Use listed $48,000 beside her name. "That isn't right," Alyssa said. "How much did you receive?" her lawyer asked. "Not that much." "Then what is the correct amount?" She looked at me, perhaps waiting for the older version of our relationship, the one where I would interrupt, soften the number, or suggest she had been confused. I kept my hands folded on the table. $22,000 from the necklace, Alyssa said, and $9,000 from another transfer. Her lawyer wrote it down. "Anything else?" Alyssa stared at the spreadsheet. "2 more payments," she said. One covered my office lease. The other paid a vendor who was threatening to sue me. Neither transaction appeared in the records she had previously surrendered. Her attorney removed his glasses. "Why did you withhold them?" "Because I thought the first set was enough." "Enough for what?" "To prove Dad told me what to do." "That was not my question." Alyssa's fingers tightened around the paper cup. The lid bent inward with a soft crack. I thought if they saw every payment, they'd decide I was part of all of it. You were part of some of it, I said. Her gaze snapped toward me. Do you enjoy saying that? No. You sound like you do. Would you prefer Dad's version? She looked down at the file again. Gerald's draft statement said Alyssa had removed jewelry without authorization, concealed the transactions through her company, then created the Christmas burglary after her debts became impossible to hide. It made no mention of his instructions. It also described her as unstable under financial pressure. Almost the same phrase he had written about me. Alyssa's face emptied as she reached the final page. He was going to tell them I staged the burglary, she said. If blaming me failed, I replied. He paid my debts and kept the receipts. My sister pushed the folder away, then stood and crossed to the window. Outside, traffic moved through dirty snow at the edge of the parking lot. For several minutes, no one spoke. When Alyssa turned around, the anger had left her voice. What do I do now? She asked. I could have told her everything would be fine. Gerald would have. He had built half his power from promises that cost him nothing when he made them. Tell the truth, I said. All of it. Even the parts that hurt you. What if they charge me? They might. What if I lose my company? That may happen too. Alyssa's mouth trembled, but she did not look away. You're not going to ask them to protect me? I will confirm that you did not know about the chocolate box before you opened it. I will confirm that Dad directed transactions when I have evidence of that. I will not tell anyone you were innocent of choices you made yourself. Her lawyer watched her carefully. Alyssa returned to the table, opened her tote, and removed a small external drive. There are 2 more pawn agreements on here, she said, and messages Dad told me to delete. Are they original exports? Her attorney asked. Some are screenshots. The rest came from an old phone I kept. Why did you keep it? Because Dad started changing what he said after the lenders called. She placed the drive beside the folder. I knew he might blame me, Alyssa said. I just didn't think he already had. Her attorney arranged the transfer through the proper channels. The drive remained sealed until a forensic examiner could make a copy, and Alyssa agreed to a second formal interview. No one offered her immunity. Rachel explained that cooperation could be considered later, especially if the records helped recover property or money, but Alyssa would still have to account for what she received and what she signed. My sister accepted that without asking me to intervene. It was the first decision I had seen her make that did not begin with the question of who could remove the consequences. The new records tied Gerald to 2 additional loans. In one message, he instructed Alyssa to describe a customer's diamond as estate inventory. In another, he told her to split the proceeds so the store deposit would not match the lender's full payment. $21,000 went toward Alyssa's debts. More than $100,000 went into Belle and Daughters. Gerald had used her appetite for rescue, but he had not forced her to sign. Both facts remained true. Near the end of February, Rachel met with Gerald's attorney. Naomi attended for my interests, but made clear I was not a party to any agreement. I learned the details afterward, from the written summary approved for us. The prosecution had not promised a specific sentence or formal plea. Rachel offered Gerald a chance to provide a truthful account through counsel before charging decisions were finalized. He would have to identify the location of missing property, explain the insurance documents, stop contacting witnesses about their statements, and cooperate with restitution. If he did those things early, prosecutors could consider the value of his assistance. Gerald's attorney requested time. My father did not admit wrongdoing, but he did not reject the meeting outright. For one afternoon, he had an exit that required only the thing he had demanded from everyone else for years: loyalty to the truth. That evening, Gerald sent me a message. Alyssa is lying to save herself. She took stones long before Christmas. I can prove it, but once I do, there will be no protecting her. I forwarded it to Naomi without replying. Less than a minute later, Alyssa called. Did you tell Rachel I stole everything? She asked. No. Dad says you gave the prosecutor my private records and asked them to charge me. Your attorney gave investigators the records you surrendered. He said you told them I planned the burglary. Send me his message. Alyssa hesitated, then forwarded a screenshot. Samantha has decided her career matters more than you do. She is giving them your pawn records and calling you the thief. I am still trying to protect you. The structure matched his message to me. Alyssa is lying to save herself. Samantha has decided her career matters more than you do. I can prove it. I am still trying to protect you. Gerald changed the name and the accusation, but the invitation remained the same. Each daughter was supposed to fear the other enough to run back to him. I'm sending you what he wrote to me, I said. Alyssa read it while we remained on the phone. He said there would be no protecting me, she murmured. He told me you took the stones. And he told me you were asking the prosecutor to charge me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Alyssa said, He doesn't know we compare messages now. No. What should we tell him? Nothing. She almost objected. I heard the breath enter her lungs, then stop. Nothing, she repeated. We sent both messages to our attorneys. The following day, Evan returned to the 2 folders Gerald had prepared against us. He displayed the 3 ghost inventory certificates from the insurance claim. The same 3 diamonds appeared in both versions. In the file against me, Gerald described them as stones I had removed from internal inventory using my old alarm access. In the file against Alyssa, he described those exact stones as collateral she had taken to hide business debts. 2 alleged thieves, 2 different methods, 3 identical diamonds. Could he simply have reused the certificate numbers because he needed examples? Naomi asked. He attached current grading reports and recent photographs, Evan replied. The images appear to have been taken inside Bell and Daughters within the past year. Do we know where the stones are now? Torres asked. No confirmed sale, pledge, recovery, or seizure has been located, Evan said. I studied the photographs. The stones were real. Their laser inscriptions were complete. Gerald had insured them at high values, yet no customer or dealer could immediately step forward and say, that diamond is mine, because he had stripped away the source records. That made them useful, in a way ordinary stolen property was not. He could put one in my home and call it store inventory. He could place another in Alyssa's office and call it hidden collateral. Without an ownership trail, Gerald could change the story faster than anyone could challenge it. What if he still has all 3? I asked. Torres answered carefully. That is possible, not established. He used diamonds in the chocolate box to support the story against me. If he needs to support the other version, he'll need physical evidence connected to Alyssa. Naomi turned toward the screen. We are not asking Samantha or her sister to provoke him. No one should, Torres said. Send us the analysis. We will decide what investigative steps are appropriate. I did exactly that. I did not call Gerald. I did not tell Alyssa to pretend she was turning against me. Whatever happened next had to come from him without either daughter pushing. 2 nights later, Alyssa came to my condominium with takeout. Neither of us ate. We sat at the dining table where the chocolate box had first been opened, comparing old account names that might connect the 3 ghost stones to lenders or storage records. Our conversation was practical, careful. We did not discuss forgiveness. At 9:26, Alyssa's phone lit up. She read the message, then placed the device between us. I can still fix this, but you need to move your storage key back where it belongs. What storage key? I asked. Alyssa's fingers curled against the table. I rent a unit for event equipment, she said. Dad helped me set it up. Mom keeps the spare key. Where? In the junk drawer in her kitchen. The 3 diamonds had no lawful history, and my father had just asked Alyssa to return access to the one place he could connect to her without entering her home. The spare key was still in Linda's drawer. The spare key was still in Linda's kitchen drawer, assuming she had not already handed it to Gerald. Naomi told us not to drive to my parents' house, not to warn my mother, and not to touch the storage unit. Your father asked about access to a location tied to Alyssa, she said. That message matters. What happens next has to be handled by the investigators. Alyssa sat across from me at the dining table, staring at Gerald's text as though the words might change if she waited long enough. What if Mom gives him the key tonight, she asked. Then Torres needs to know tonight. What if Dad is only trying to retrieve business supplies? Then the records will show that. Alyssa looked toward the empty space where the chocolate box had rested weeks earlier. You don't believe that? No, but what I believe is not a search warrant. Naomi contacted Detective Torres, while Alyssa called her attorney. By midnight, both lawyers had sent formal notices preserving the message and identifying the storage facility, unit number, lease records, and known key holders. The unit was rented under Alyssa's events company. It contained folding backdrops, linens, artificial floral walls, lighting stands, and unopened cases of glassware from a wedding expo she had canceled the year before. Gerald had helped her sign the lease. Linda kept the spare key because Alyssa lost things often enough that the family had turned it into a joke. That joke no longer sounded harmless. The next morning, Torres and another investigator met Linda at Naomi's office. My mother had been told the questions concerned property access. Gerald was not invited, and Linda arrived without him. I waited in a smaller room down the hall. Naomi had advised me not to attend the interview because my presence might make Linda more defensive. Alyssa waited at her attorney's office for the same reason. Through the wall, I could hear only the rise and fall of voices, never the words. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. When the conference room door opened, Linda came out first. Her coat was buttoned wrong, one side hanging lower than the other, and she gripped her purse against her ribs. "You brought the police into this again," she said when she saw me. "They asked you about a key. They treated me like I had committed a crime. Did Dad take it?" My mother's eyes moved toward Naomi. "This is not the hallway for that conversation," Naomi said. Linda ignored her. "Gerald is trying to keep this family from being torn apart. Did he take the key?" "I don't know where it is." "That wasn't my question." A familiar weariness settled over her face, the expression she used when truth required more energy than she wished to spend. "The junk drawer is full of things," Linda said. "Old keys, batteries, takeout menus. I can't account for every object in my house." Torres appeared in the doorway behind her. "We asked Mrs. Bell to contact us if she remembers anything else," the detective said. My mother pulled her purse higher. "I have nothing else to remember." She walked past me toward the elevators. Torres waited until the doors closed before speaking. "She confirmed she kept the spare key," the detective said. "She claims she has not seen it recently." "Do you believe her?" I asked. "My opinion does not authorize a search." The answer sounded like something I might have said, and under different circumstances I would have appreciated it. Torres continued. "Alyssa's attorney has offered access to the unit and the facility records. We are working through the proper process. Neither of you should visit the location." "What if Gerald goes there first?" I asked. "Then the facility's access system may record it." "May?" "Not every entrance requires a unique code. The front gate logs vehicles and keypad use. But a person admitted by another tenant could reach the building." Gerald had owned a jewelry store for more than 30 years. He understood cameras, locks, and audit trails. He also believed most systems existed for people less important than him. That arrogance had protected him longer than it should have. It might also be the reason he made a mistake. Alyssa agreed to a recorded interview that afternoon. Her attorney allowed me to join only for the opening portion. When she confirmed the unit's contents and who held keys, "I'm giving permission for investigators to examine the unit," Alyssa said. "I understand that does not prevent them from using anything they find against me." Her voice wavered on the final words, but she did not take them back. Torres leaned forward. "Are you aware of any diamonds, jewelry, loan documents, or Bell and Daughters property currently stored there?" "No." "Have you placed any such property there since Christmas?" "No." "Has anyone asked you to?" Alyssa handed over a printed copy of Gerald's message. "My father told me to move the spare key back where it belonged," she said. I did not respond. "Why do you think he asked?" Alyssa glanced at me, then stopped herself. "I don't know what he intended," she said. "I only know he should not need that key." That was a better answer than the one she would have given a month earlier. No guessing, no attempt to make herself useful by stretching what she knew. Before I left the interview, Alyssa caught my wrist. "If they find those stones in my unit, I could be arrested," she whispered. "Yes. You're supposed to tell me they won't." "I'm supposed to tell you the truth." Her fingers loosened. "What if nobody believes me?" she asked. "Then the records have to speak before we do." The investigation moved more slowly than fear did. For several days, we heard almost nothing. Torres would not discuss surveillance, warrants, or requests made to third parties. Naomi reminded me that silence from investigators was not evidence that nothing was happening. I spent those days working for my condominium, rebuilding the contracts Gerald's accusations had cost me. A probate attorney in New Haven sent 3 estate pieces for appraisal. Miriam referred a neighbor. The income barely covered Naomi's latest invoice, but it kept my name attached to work instead of scandal. On Thursday afternoon, Evan asked for a secure call. He had reviewed records from a safe deposit facility used by Bell and Daughters. The box was rented under a holding company Gerald controlled, not under the jewelry store's public name. Gerald had accessed it twice in the previous year. The third access occurred the morning after Rachel Monroe's meeting with his attorney. Was that lawful? I asked. Accessing his own box was not a crime, Evan said. The timing makes it relevant. Do we know what he removed? The facility does not record the contents of private boxes. Cameras show him entering with a flat document case and leaving with the same case, though it appears fuller. Naomi raised a hand before I could speak. Appearance is not proof of contents. Correct, Evan said, but the time log and video have been preserved. The access occurred less than 3 hours before Gerald sent Alyssa the message about the storage key. 3 stones with no ownership records. A safe deposit box. A request for access to Alyssa's unit. The pieces formed a shape, but Torres still needed evidence that could survive more than my interpretation. That came from the storage facility. A motion-activated camera covered the hallway outside Alyssa's unit. Another faced the parking lot. The company preserved footage after receiving a formal request. Gerald's SUV entered the lot late Friday afternoon. He did not use Alyssa's gate code. A moving truck blocked the entrance, and Gerald followed it through while the gate remained open. The parking camera recorded him carrying a dark leather document case toward the building. 27 minutes later, he came back without it. Torres did not show us the footage immediately. Naomi received a limited summary after Gerald had left, and the investigators had secured the next steps. Why didn't they stop him? Alyssa demanded during our call. Because entering your unit is one part of the case, Naomi said. They need to preserve what happened, identify what was placed there, and avoid giving his attorney grounds to argue the investigators created the result. He could remove it again. The unit is being handled. What does that mean? It means you do not go near it. Alyssa paced across my living room, phone clenched in her hand. They watched him walk into my unit with a case. They recorded him entering the building. Naomi corrected. The hallway camera shows him at your door. We do not yet know what the interior evidence will establish. My sister stopped beside the window. You always sound like her now. That is not an insult. It wasn't meant as one. An hour later, the storage facility received an anonymous call. The caller claimed Alyssa Bell had hidden diamonds and jewelry from Bell and Daughters inside her unit. He provided the facility address, unit number, and a description of a gray records box behind a stack of floral panels. The employee who took the call notified management, and management contacted the detective named in the preservation request. Gerald had not used his own phone. He had used a prepaid device purchased that morning from a convenience store less than 2 miles from the storage facility. At first, that fact did not identify him. The call came from the phone, but investigators were not going to obtain immediate carrier records and turn them into a miracle. Gerald connected himself to the device through a simpler mistake. He paid for it with his personal credit card. The receipt carried the last 4 digits of the card he had used for years at the jewelry store. Camera footage showed him at the counter, wearing the same navy overcoat visible later in the storage parking lot. A second camera outside the facility recorded him sitting in his SUV shortly before the anonymous call reached the office. His head was lowered, and a small, dark phone rested near the steering wheel. No tower dump was needed, no instant data from a cell provider. Gerald had bought the device, carried it to the location, and used it within a narrow window before discarding it in a trash bin beside a gas pump. The police recovered the phone after reviewing the convenience store footage. Even then, Naomi warned us that the phone was one link, not the whole chain. Gerald could claim he bought it for another purpose. He could say someone else used it. He could argue the storage visit concerned business equipment. The evidence inside the unit would decide whether those excuses survived. Linda called me that evening. Her voice came through so quietly that I stepped away from Alyssa, who was sitting at my kitchen counter. Your father took the key, my mother said. When? Yesterday morning. You told Torres you didn't know where it was. I didn't know then. Did you see him take it? Linda breathed into the phone. Somewhere behind her. A clock chimed 7 times. I saw him standing by the drawer, she said. When? The day before the interview. My grip tightened around the phone. Then you knew before you met Torres. I did not know what he was doing. You knew he had access to Alyssa's storage unit. He said he needed old store displays. Why didn't you call us? Because I wanted to believe there was an explanation. You wanted an explanation that required nothing from you. Linda began to cry. The sound was soft and controlled, as if even grief needed to remain presentable. I thought he was retrieving documents, she said. He went in carrying a case and came out without it. My mother went silent. Did Gerald tell you anything about 3 diamonds? I asked. No. Did he mention Alyssa? He said she had ruined everything by talking. Alyssa looked up when she heard her name. What else? I asked. He said he had one chance to make people see which daughter caused this. The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. You need to tell Torres exactly that. I am telling you. I am not the investigator. Samantha, please don't make me repeat it to strangers. You protected him when he blamed me. Now he is trying to put evidence in Alyssa's unit. I don't know that. You know enough to stop saying you know nothing. Linda's breathing broke once, then steadied. Will you come with me? She asked. No, Naomi can arrange for your lawyer to be present. You won't sit beside your own mother? I will not become the reason you finally tell the truth. She ended the call without saying goodbye. I forwarded a written account to Naomi and Torres. Linda gave a formal statement the next morning, accompanied by an attorney of her own. Her admission helped, but it did not make her brave. She had waited until Gerald's plan was already captured on camera and the anonymous call had been made. By then, investigators had obtained the authority they needed to enter the unit and document its contents. Alyssa was required to attend because the lease was hers, though her attorney remained beside her. I waited in Naomi's car across the lot. Cold rain streaked the windshield, turning the storage buildings into gray blocks behind water. From where I sat, I could see Torres speaking to Alyssa beneath the metal awning. My sister's arms were wrapped around herself. Her attorney stood close but did not touch her. Naomi lowered the driver's window enough to hear when Torres raised her voice over the rain. Once this opens, the detective told Alyssa, whatever is inside becomes part of your story until we prove who put it there. Alyssa nodded. The facility manager inserted the master key while Torres documented the lock. Metal scraped, then clicked. The rolling door began to rise. Behind the floral panels sat a gray records box that had not been there the last time Alyssa visited. And taped across its lid was a Bell & Daughters inventory label bearing her signature. The gray records box remained sealed until Detective Torres photographed every side, documented the inventory label, and confirmed who had access to the unit. Alyssa stood beneath the metal awning while rain blew across the parking lot. From Naomi's car, I watched her sign the first evidence form with both hands wrapped around the pen. The signature taped to the box looked nearly identical to the one she wrote in front of the detective. Nearly. Her attorney noticed it too. That label is not recent, he said. My client's current signature does not form the final letter that way. Torres did not answer. She placed the comment in her notes and continued documenting the scene. Once the hallway and unit had been photographed, investigators carried the box into a secure area inside the facility office. Naomi and I were allowed to enter only after Torres finished the initial search and confirmed that our presence would not disturb the evidence. The room smelled of wet cardboard and burnt coffee. Alyssa sat at a folding table beside her attorney, pale but composed. The gray box stood on another table across the room, its lid open and its contents arranged on clean paper. 3 black velvet pouches lay beside 3 sealed evidence bags. Each bag contained a loose diamond. No one asked me to identify them. Evan had already warned that visual recognition would mean little when the laser inscriptions could provide exact matches. Torres read the numbers aloud while another officer entered them into the evidence log. They matched the 3 stones Gerald had reported stolen despite having no purchase invoices, consignment records, or lawful ownership trail. The ghost inventory was no longer a set of suspicious certificates. It was sitting inside Alyssa's storage unit. My sister's breathing quickened. I have never seen those diamonds, she said. Her attorney placed a hand on the table. Alyssa, answer only the questions you are asked. I need them to know. They heard you. Torres looked at her. When did you last enter this unit? January 9th. Did you inspect the area behind the floral panels? Yes. I moved 2 of them to reach a lighting case. Was the gray box present? No. Can anyone confirm that? One of my assistants was with me. Torres wrote down the name. Alyssa turned toward me. Sam, I swear I didn't put them there. I know what the cameras show, I said. That isn't what I asked. No, I replied, but it is what will matter. The answer hurt her, though she nodded. A month earlier, I might have rushed to promise that I believed every word. That would have comforted her for a minute and changed nothing in the evidence room. Now, the investigators had to establish who carried the box, who created the label, and when those stones entered the unit. Alyssa's fear could not be allowed to become another shortcut. The box itself provided the first link. The inventory label came from an old Bell & Daughters printer. Evan found the same serial pattern on labels produced before the store closed. Alyssa's signature had been copied from a collateral authorization form she signed the previous summer. The copied image included a tiny ink break above the last letter. That break appeared on the storage label in the exact same place. It was not a new signature. It was an old one printed again. The velvet pouches carried fibers and adhesive residue consistent with supplies recovered from Gerald's office. That did not make them unique to him, since the store had used hundreds of similar pouches, but it connected the packaging to the business he controlled. The stronger evidence came from the movement records. Gerald entered the safe deposit facility on the morning after Rachel offered him a chance to cooperate. He left with the leather document case appearing thicker than when he arrived. Later that afternoon, his SUV entered Alyssa's storage facility. The hallway camera showed him using a physical key at her unit. He carried the document case inside, remained there for 23 minutes, then walked back toward the parking lot without it. Investigators recovered the same case from behind a cabinet inside the unit. Its interior lining held several short, dark fibers matching the velvet pouches. No single item proved the entire act. Together, they made his innocent explanations smaller and smaller. The prepaid phone completed the sequence. Gerald purchased it with his personal credit card. The convenience store camera captured his face, coat, and vehicle. Another recording showed him sitting inside that vehicle outside the storage facility shortly before the anonymous report was made. The phone itself had been recovered from a gas station trash bin. Investigators did not need instant carrier data to know who had bought it. The receipt and footage established that. A forensic examination later found a draft note saved on the device. Unit C14. Gray box behind flower walls. Bell property. The wording matched the anonymous caller's description. Gerald had bought a phone to hide his voice, then typed himself instructions on the same device. Torres did not arrest him at the storage facility. The evidence had to be processed, compared, and presented to prosecutors. Rachel also wanted to avoid giving Gerald's attorney grounds to claim investigators had rushed toward the person they already suspected. For 9 days, my father continued moving through town as though nothing had changed. He went to church with Linda. He met his lawyer for lunch at a country club. He sent employees another email, claiming the investigation would soon reveal which daughter had betrayed the store. Then Torres asked him to return for a follow-up interview. Gerald brought Martin Shaw. I was not present, but Naomi later received a summary of the portions relevant to me. Some of the exchange also became part of a pre-trial hearing months later, where I heard Torres describe it under oath. At first, Gerald denied visiting Alyssa's storage facility. Torres showed him the entry footage. He changed his answer. He said he had gone there to retrieve Bell & Daughters' display materials that belonged to the store. Torres asked why he carried a document case into the unit and left without it. Gerald said he could not remember. She showed him the safe deposit access record. He claimed the visit concerned personal estate documents. Then Torres presented the photograph of the leather case recovered beside the box. Gerald leaned toward his attorney and whispered for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, he said Alyssa must have taken the case from his house. Torres asked how she could have placed it in the unit before his own visit was captured on camera. According to the hearing transcript, Gerald stopped answering for 17 seconds. Then he accused me. Samantha planned this, he said. She turned Alyssa against me and arranged the whole thing. Even in a room where I was not present, my father reached for my name. Torres asked whether I had access to his safe deposit box, his personal credit card, his vehicle, or Linda's kitchen drawer. Gerald said I had always been clever with records. His attorney ended the interview. An arrest warrant followed after Rachel reviewed the complete evidence package. Gerald was taken into custody on charges connected to evidence tampering, obstruction, false reporting, and the larger fraud investigation. The news reached me through Naomi, not through a dramatic knock at my door. I was at my desk reviewing an estate inventory when she called. "They arrested him this morning," she said. I set down my loop. "Where?" "Outside his attorney's office." "Was there an incident?" "No." He surrendered his phone and went with the officers. For several seconds, I listened to the hum of my desk lamp. I had spent weeks imagining Gerald finally losing control. In those private versions, he shouted, threatened, or made one last attempt to command the room. Instead, he stepped into a car. The quietness of it felt more permanent. At the arraignment 2 days later, Linda sat behind Martin Shaw with both hands folded over her purse. Alyssa attended with her own attorney and chose a seat on the opposite side of the courtroom. I sat beside Naomi. Gerald entered through a side door wearing a dark suit. He looked smaller without the jewelry store behind him, though his posture remained rigid. When he saw Alyssa, his mouth tightened. Then his gaze found me. Nothing in his face asked for help. He looked offended that I had not prevented this. The judge imposed conditions that restricted Gerald's contact with witnesses and his access to business property. Bail was set after arguments about finances, the ongoing investigation, and the new attempt to place evidence. The hearing ended without spectacle. As officers prepared to lead Gerald away, he turned toward me in the corridor outside the courtroom. Martin Shaw told him not to speak, but my father ignored him. "You set me up," Gerald said. His voice carried far enough that 2 deputies looked over. "No," I replied. "I stopped stepping into the place you prepared for me. You fed Alyssa a story because you knew she was weak." Alyssa stood several yards behind me. I did not turn to see her reaction. "You had 2 daughters," I said. "You kept treating us like 2 exits." Gerald's face changed. Not with guilt, with disbelief. He could understand anger, fear, and bargaining because all 3 still left him at the center of the decision. What he could not understand was being denied a role in what happened next. "I was protecting this family," he said. "You were protecting the version where you never had to answer for anything." One of the deputies touched his elbow. Gerald pulled away from the contact, then allowed himself to be led through the secured door. I did not call after him. The new charges changed the prosecution's position. Before the storage unit, Rachel had been willing to consider early cooperation, recovery of assets, and an admission that could reduce the time and cost of the case. Gerald could have disclosed where the missing property went, helped identify customers, and stopped using his daughters as alternative explanations. Instead, he had taken 3 stones from a private box, copied Alyssa's signature, planted the property in her storage unit, and filed an anonymous report. He had committed a new act while his lawyers were discussing whether he deserved credit for cooperation. Rachel met with Naomi, Alyssa's attorney, and representatives for the insurer several days after the arraignment. She made no promises about sentencing, but her position was plain. The obstruction evidence would be charged separately or used in any final plea calculation. Gerald's behavior after learning of the investigation showed that he was still willing to manipulate evidence and blame another person. "The resolution available before the storage incident is no longer available," Rachel said. Alyssa lowered her head. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. "It means your cooperation will be evaluated on its own," Rachel replied. "It does not erase the transactions you participated in, but the evidence supports your statement that you did not place those 3 stones in the unit." My sister's shoulders dropped slightly. Not relief exactly. More like the first full breath she had taken in weeks. The receiver gained broader control over Bell and Daughters soon afterward. The remaining legitimate inventory was separated from disputed property. Customer items were secured. Equipment was valued for sale. Employees received formal notices explaining what benefits would end and where they could submit wage claims. Gerald could no longer use the store's email list to accuse me. The last message sent under his authority remained the one telling everyone that loyalty mattered most when a family was under attack. By early spring, a commercial liquidator purchased several display cases, workbenches, and security cabinets. Another jeweler expressed interest in the lease but refused to acquire the Bell and Daughters name. I went to the storefront on the morning the sign came down. No one invited me. I stood across the street beside Miriam Hale, who had come to submit an additional restitution document. A worker on a ladder removed the word daughters first. The letters had been mounted individually, polished brass against dark green stone. He loosened each one, passed it down, then returned for the next. Miriam watched without speaking. After the final letter disappeared, only Belle and remained above the windows. The unfinished phrase suited the place better than the full name ever had. Gerald had used his daughters as decoration when the store was successful, and as exits when it began to collapse. Now neither of us would remain on his door. The worker removed and, then Belle. Faded outlines marked where the letters had protected the stone from weather. For a few minutes, the family name was still visible, only because the rest of the building had darkened around it. By afternoon, even that shadow was covered. Naomi's phone rang while we were walking back to her car. She listened, thanked the caller, then turned to me. "That was Rachel," she said. Gerald's attorney asked whether the earlier cooperation offer could be restored. "What did she say?" Naomi held my gaze. The deal he could have taken before he entered Alyssa's storage unit no longer exists. My father had spent years telling people that I destroyed my future because I could not accept responsibility. When his own exit finally required the truth, he chose another daughter to bury instead. The months after Gerald's arrest were quieter than the weeks before it, but they cost more. Every new invoice from Naomi reduced the savings account I had spent 11 years building. My work returned slowly, one client at a time, while half the people who had canceled on me waited to see whether the newspapers would call me a victim or an accomplice. No newspaper ever gave the situation a word clean enough to fix it. The court documents helped. So did the insurer's written finding that the stones in the chocolate box had been concealed before the package reached me. The alarm company confirmed that my code had been disabled after my resignation, then restored through Gerald's administrator account shortly before Christmas. By summer, the State Gemological Association withdrew the complaint Belle and daughters had filed against me. They did not apologize. The letter merely said the investigation found no basis for disciplinary action. I framed nothing. I placed the letter in the same locked cabinet as the legal bills and returned to work. The receiver spent more than a year sorting the store's remaining assets. Some customers recovered their original jewelry. Others received stones, settings, or money that covered only part of what had been taken. Miriam Hale never got her husband's diamond back. Investigators traced it through a dealer, then another dealer, then a private buyer who had purchased it without knowing its history. Recovering it would have required a separate civil fight with uncertain results and more legal expense than Miriam could afford. The restitution fund paid her part of its value. She accepted the check, folded it once, and placed it in her purse. "It still isn't the one he gave me," Miriam said. "No," I replied, "it isn't." She appreciated that I did not call the payment closure. Linda lost the house in Avon the following spring. The bank did not throw her onto the street without warning. She had months of notices, meetings, and chances to sell before foreclosure. An independent counselor helped her move into a 2-bedroom rental near Farmington, close enough to church and the grocery store that she could manage without depending on Gerald. I paid for her first meeting with that counselor, just as I had promised. I did not pay the mortgage, move her into my condominium, or sign a new lease in my name. Linda called the morning the movers arrived. "There are boxes I can't lift," she said. "The moving company is scheduled for 9. They charge by the hour. You approved their estimate." My mother lowered her voice. "I meant there are things I shouldn't have to do alone." I stood beside my office window, watching a delivery driver carry 2 sealed appraisal cases toward the entrance. "Alyssa offered to help you unpack," I said. "She has her own problems. So do I." A long silence followed. "I'm still your mother," Linda said. "And I'm still the daughter you allowed Gerald to accuse. Are you going to punish me forever?" "I'm not punishing you. I'm declining the job you assigned me." Linda ended the call. Later that week, she mailed me a handwritten letter. She admitted that Gerald had asked her to repeat his version of my resignation, that she knew my alarm code had never been permanently removed, and that she had ignored too many questions because the answers might cost her the house. The letter contained one apology. It did not ask me to forgive her. I kept it. Alyssa's case resolved before Gerald's. Her cooperation helped identify customer property, reconstruct the pawn transactions, and prove she had not placed the 3 diamonds inside her storage unit. It also showed that she had signed documents she knew were incomplete and accepted money from deals she had chosen not to examine. The judge sentenced her to probation, restitution, and community service. She was barred from managing consigned jewelry or customer trust property during that period. Alyssa sold her car, closed the events company, and moved into a smaller apartment. The money from the sale went toward what she owed. Before her sentencing, she asked me to write a letter. "I'm not asking you to lie," she said. "Just tell the judge I'm a good person." We were sitting in Naomi's conference room, where the glass table had reflected so many documents that I sometimes saw certificate numbers even when the surface was empty. "I can describe what you did after the investigation began," I said. "I can say you surrendered the fourth stone, provided your records, and accepted questioning after your father tried to frame you. That sounds clinical." "It is specific." "You can't say I'm good?" "I can't make a legal argument out of a label." Alyssa looked down at her hands. "Dad would have written anything I wanted." "Yes. That's why his letters stopped meaning anything." My sister nodded slowly. "Write the specific one." I did. After sentencing, Alyssa started working for a catering company. She answered phones, prepared invoices, and had no access to client valuables beyond rented tablecloths and serving trays. We spoke every few weeks. Some conversations ended well, others did not. She still wanted quick reassurance when consequences frightened her, and I still had to stop myself from turning every question into an examination. Neither of us called that reconciliation. We called it Tuesday, or coffee, or a 10-minute phone call that did not end with one sister begging and the other sister rescuing. Gerald's case took longer. His attorneys challenged the searches, the computer records, the safe deposit evidence, and the use of the storage footage. They argued that he had entered Alyssa's unit with permission, that the diamonds belonged to Belle and daughters, and that the prepaid phone had been purchased for private business. The preserved draft on the phone weakened that explanation. So did the copied signature, the leather case, the safe deposit video, and the anonymous report describing the exact location of the gray box. The larger fraud case was worse. The state proved that Gerald had reported property stolen after it had already been pawned or sold. Customer stones had been removed from settings. Insurance values had been inflated. The Christmas loss schedule had been created before the reported burglary, while my alarm credentials had been restored to provide a path toward me. By the time Gerald changed his plea, almost 19 months had passed since the chocolate box arrived. He admitted enough to avoid a longer trial, but the agreement did not restore the terms available before he entered Alyssa's storage unit. Sentencing took place on a hot morning in late August. The courthouse air conditioning rattled through the vents, and the wooden bench pressed a hard line across my back. Naomi sat beside me. Alyssa attended with her probation officer's permission, while Linda chose a seat alone near the rear. Gerald entered wearing a navy suit that hung loose at the shoulders. He had aged since the arraignment. His hair was thinner, the skin beneath his eyes darker, but he still paused as though expecting the room to adjust around him. No one did. Rachel Monroe addressed the judge first. She described the thefts from customers, the false insurance claim, the altered records, and the effort to use two daughters as competing suspects. Her voice remained level when she reached the storage unit. "Mr. Bell was offered an opportunity to cooperate before final charging decisions," Rachel said. "Instead, he accessed concealed property, placed it in a location controlled by his younger daughter, copied her signature, and made a false report intended to direct law enforcement toward her." Gerald stared at the table. Rachel continued, "This was not panic in the first hours of an investigation. It was a deliberate act committed after counsel was involved and after the defendant understood the consequences." Martin Shaw spoke about Gerald's age, health, community service, employees, and decades as a business owner. He said the store had been Gerald's identity and that financial pressure had distorted his judgment. The judge asked whether Gerald wished to speak. "My father rose. I built that business from almost nothing," he said. "I employed people for 35 years. I helped families celebrate engagements, anniversaries, and births. I made mistakes trying to keep all of that alive." His voice strengthened as he went on. "My daughters benefited from the store their entire lives. Samantha received an education and a profession. Alyssa received employment and support, Everything I did was meant to protect what would eventually belong to them. He never said Miriam's name. He did not mention Eleanor Pike, the pawn lenders, the employees who lost insurance, or the customers who received cheaper stones and treasured rings. Gerald looked toward me. My eldest daughter has always needed to be right, he said. Once she decided I was the enemy, there was no room left for family. Naomi's hand rested near my statement. I stood when the clerk called my name. The paper shook once as I unfolded it, so I placed both hands against the lectern and waited until the movement stopped. My father is correct about one thing, I said. Bell and Daughters shaped my profession. It taught me to document what I receive, preserve what belongs to someone else, and never confuse possession with ownership. Gerald shifted in his seat. He says he lost his daughters because I exposed him. That is not what happened. He lost us when he decided our names were cheaper than his. The courtroom stayed quiet. For 5 years, I carried the blame for a sapphire that had never been lost while I worked at the store. My mother let me believe our family sold my grandmother's ring because of me. At Christmas, my father sent stolen property to my home and restored my old alarm code so the evidence would point in my direction. I turned one page. When that failed, he placed diamonds in my sister's storage unit. He copied her signature and reported her to the police. He had 2 daughters, and he treated both of us as places to leave the consequences. Gerald's mouth tightened. I am not asking the court for the highest possible punishment, and I am not asking for mercy. I am asking the court to consider the choices he continued making after he knew innocent people could be harmed. I folded the statement. My father did not protect this family. He used the word family whenever he needed someone else to pay. I returned to my seat. Gerald received a prison sentence, followed by supervised release and a restitution order that would claim much of what remained of his assets. The judge described the storage unit scheme as proof that Gerald had continued manipulating evidence when he could have begun repairing the damage. Linda covered her mouth when the sentence was announced. Alyssa stared straight ahead. My father turned before the deputies approached. "Samantha," he called. Martin Shaw reached for his arm, but Gerald pulled away. "Everything I did was for you and your sister." The words crossed the courtroom like a demand he still expected me to obey. I gathered my bag. Naomi leaned closer. "Do you want to respond?" "No." Gerald called my name again as I walked toward the exit. I did not stop. Outside, the August heat pressed against the courthouse steps. Cars moved through the intersection. A bus sighed at the curb, and someone nearby opened a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon. Naomi stood beside me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't need to enjoy it for it to be right." She nodded. That is probably the healthiest answer I've heard in this building. 2 months later, I opened a small appraisal office in West Hartford. The sign on the door read Samantha Reed, Independent Gem Appraisals. Reed had been my grandmother Ruth's maiden name. I chose it because she had taught me that jewelry was not valuable merely because it was expensive. It mattered because someone trusted another person to keep its story intact. I hired Carol Winslow for 2 mornings a week after she found work elsewhere and needed extra income. We did not pretend our confrontation in the parking garage had never happened. She apologized for repeating Gerald's version, and I apologized for the times my precision had sounded like I did not care who was hurting. Calvin never returned to bench work. His cooperation helped investigators, but the professional association suspended him for participating in stone substitutions and record changes. He sent one note to my office. "You were right to say my reasons did not excuse me." I filed it beside Linda's letter. Miriam became my first client after the office opened. She brought a silver brooch from her mother's estate and stayed for coffee after the appraisal. In December, nearly 2 years after Gerald's gift, a blue box arrived at the front desk. My hand stopped above the keyboard. The paper was a different shade, but the silver ribbon brought back the smell of fresh adhesive, rain against my windows, and 3 velvet pouches beneath a wooden tray. Carol noticed. "Do you want me to open it?" she asked. I checked the return label. Miriam Hale. "No," I said. "I can do it." The lid lifted without resistance. Inside were 12 chocolates arranged in plain paper cups. No raised corner, no wooden insert, no hidden space. Only chocolate. A card rested on top. "Thank you for giving back what was never yours to carry." I read it once, then handed the box to Carol. "Take one," I said. She chose a caramel. I picked dark chocolate without nuts, and we left the box open on the front counter for everyone in the office. For the first time, I understood that returning what had been stolen did not mean rebuilding the family that stole it. It meant walking away without carrying anything that had never belonged in my hands. When someone asks you to protect the family by hiding theft, fraud, or abuse, remember that silence does not keep a family together. It only gives the person causing harm more time to choose another victim. You should document important conversations, preserve messages, seek qualified legal help, and avoid handling possible evidence on your own. Loving a relative does not require paying their debts, lying to authorities, or shielding them from fair consequences. You can support someone by helping them find professional advice, but you should not sacrifice your home, savings, career, or integrity to repair damage they knowingly created. Samantha's greatest victory was not sending her father to prison. It was learning to tell the truth without taking responsibility for everyone else's choices. Set clear boundaries, speak accurately, and let people carry the consequences of their own actions. For more stories about betrayal, justice, and hard-earned strength, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.